This is a Momentum Media production.
The SMSF Advisor Show, your expert insights into the biggest themes shaping the SMSF advice industry.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the SMSF Advisor Show. I'm joined by my co-host, Smarter SMSF CEO Aaron Dunn. Welcome, Aaron.
Hi Miranda, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Just dealing with everything that's happening at the moment.
Yes, the joys of Omicron. So, we're sort of a bit all over the shop again in terms of I'm in the office more because, I need to do these sorts of things. But, back to sort of that mix of some staff at home and some staff in the office. And we've got Novak Djokovic as well to oversee whilst in Melbourne as well, which is certainly keeping things entertaining on the news front as well.
Yes, definitely. Just talking about news, some of the things that have been happening on the SMSF front. We've seen a couple of sort of business moves. We saw BT very close to Christmas exit SMSF establishment and admin services. They were obviously quite a big provider, so that's quite significant.
Yeah, we obviously saw that BT business, it was probably the best part of a decade ago, really move into the SMSF space quite dramatically, BT Panorama. And as part of that, they then built out an administration business that sat inside that brand to be able to support the advisors working through that network. And so obviously off the back of the Hayne Royal Commission, we've seen Westpac exit financial services. And as a result of that, there was a decision ultimately being made here to cease that offering, and they're going through, from my understanding, a relatively seamless transition of those some 500 clients across to Heffron. No compulsion around that, but sort of transitioning clients across to another administration provider, which I'm sure is creating a bit of competitiveness in the market as well.
That's for sure. I think that's safe to say.
Yeah.
But it does seem like they have a good transition process, so that'll help their clients at least.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened recently was that we saw TopDocs Legal acquired by Sequoia Financial Group. So TopDocs is quite a bigger kind of document or legal services provider as well.
Yeah, so what we had here, I guess this was the remaining legal division of TopDocs. Of course, we had TopDocs get acquired the document business by Class last year, and that acquisition really was the automated document engine and so forth, and obviously the client list and stuff that went through, part of Class's strategy, and they've naturally gone through the past few years and acquired a number of providers in this space. And obviously I know this space very well, being in the same space myself in the SMSF sense. But so what it appears has happens here is that legal division that didn't go along with that ride has really bolted into Sequoia, that does have their own document engine, that Sequoia has a relationship or a part ownership in particular the NTAA corporate. So it was an interesting one. They obviously see the need to build in legal support, and that opportunity of the TopDocs legal team allows them to now do that.
We also saw Asic release guidance for tax financial advisors. That's obviously after the Better Advice Act was passed. It just addresses some of the questions that advisors in that kind of situation might have at the moment.
Yeah, so this is, again, going back over the decision to go, let's move to a single framework, or let's move to a framework that doesn't require so many layers, I guess, for advisors. Obviously we had licensed advisors have to become registered with the Tax Practitioners Board to become licensed tax advisors. There was a decision made to streamline that process and bring that back into Asic. So now that this process is starting to take effect, we're seeing Asic release a range of info sheets. And in particular, this one, info sheet 268, goes through and looks at, a whole range of questions, whether it's, how the registration works, whether there are any further education requirements and so forth. So we're just seeing the rollout, I guess, of some of these procedural changes that are happening.
We're also continuing to see Superstream still cause issues. One of the things that we've sort of been hearing is that it's not just SMSFs that are having the issues, but in some cases, APRA funds are actually holding up the process because they're requiring extra ID checks and things like that that aren't actually part of the standards, which is causing some delays.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So, yeah, we've obviously seen the shift for funds, SMSFs, to comply with the Superstream requirements. And I was part of a discussion recently with the SMSF Association and the ATO around, I guess, how are we going 2 months on? And this was one of the challenges, I guess, where, how well are the SMSF community dealing with it and how well are the APRA funds dealing with it. And I think there are very similar lines between the two, insofar that there were some SMSF people that work in the industry and have spent the time knowing and understanding it. They've probably dealt with it reasonably well. And then you've got a whole heap of people that weren't doing it really well. And the same can probably be said on the APRA side. Some may be trying to hide behind the know your client rule, but when you've got, additional ID checks that verify who they are and so forth, there have been examples of where the process appears to be held up other than for no reason that they want to hold it up. And I guess that's where there's a bit of pushback. And obviously the ATO and APRA, where relevant, would go in and be able to address those particular issues. Are they genuine issues that need to be looked at and fixed in the system, or is it something else?
The other thing we saw was just a bit of an update on how reporting needs to be done for market-linked pensions. We've obviously seen quite a few changes in this space, and the ATO has just provided a bit more guidance on what their expectations are with reporting for those pensions.
Yeah, so obviously we've spoken about this for a long time because it's really an amendment back to the 1 July 2017 rules around the commutation value for market-linked pensions and so forth. But now that we've got that legislation finalised, and we've obviously seen the ATO issue alerts throughout this journey around reporting requirements and so forth. The most recent update really just says that the ATO is not going to take compliance action if the fund didn't report that required transfer balance event after the commutation, as long as it was in line with the alerts and stuff before. So hopefully we're going to get some closure on this as a topic because it feels like it's just been around forever. But yeah, it's really, in this period of time, we needed to cover something technical in what's update, and that's the technical bit for you.
Shortly, we're going to be joined by Chris Levy, a partner at Aquila Super. He's going to take us through some of the key audit issues at the moment. Chris is definitely a SMSF expert, and he's even dealt with some litigation cases in the audit and SMSF space, so he definitely has plenty to talk about. So we're now joined by Chris Levy. Welcome, Chris.
Hello.
It's lovely to have you in the studio. So we'll just be discussing some of the key kind of audit topics that are relevant to SMSFs at the moment. I thought firstly we could look at valuations, particularly given the focus from the regulator on that space at the moment. What kind of issues are you seeing in that area, and are trustees providing enough evidence, or what's kind of happening in that space at the moment?
Well, look, hi, Rana, and, thanks for letting me come on. Yeah, look, this has been the big issue for this season. The ATO have been banging the proverbial drum on this for a while and have really ramped up their, not just their expectations, but their sort of public pronouncements as to, what they expect. So there should be no doubt in the industry as to what's required. Most accountants are providing proper valuations, or at least they're aware of this need for valuations. Not all, and auditors are having to sort of push back and say, "Look, I'm sorry, but you need to go and sort of obtain these valuations." But one of the big bugbears that we're experiencing is that the accountants, the trustees definitely, but the accountants themselves don't know the intricacies of the valuations required, and often that's. The valuations that they're obtaining don't, even though, we've seen some of like 20 pages, but they're not having the comparable sale data that the ATO insists is included in order for that valuation to be relied upon. And we're having to have these conversations, basically pushing back on the accountant, saying, look, I'm sorry, but this isn't up to scratch. You need to go back and get these comparable sales. And it's just creating a lot of angst in when these audit engagements happen. So, it's not ideal, but yeah.
So the auditors, I should say that the ATO, I guess, is really coming back to the industry and saying, the days of, let's try to get a little curbside, free piece of paper.
Yes.
Those days are pretty much behind us when we think about it. So what the ATO, to an extent, so what they're saying is we need more than that. So we need the ability to substantiate and provide sufficient evidence.
Absolutely, yes.
Has moved significantly from 10 years ago and so forth. And we've got our valuation guidelines that we need to uphold to be able to do these things. So you've made a really interesting comment there about the fact that, there is that pushback. The one thing I think that I'm keen to explore a little bit further here is how you're practically dealing with some of that stuff.
Well, I mean, it's just you just end up having to have these very difficult conversations, Aaron. You sort of, and you feel terrible. You say, look, I'm really sorry, accountant. This poor trustee that spent $2,000 on a valuation, which is the sort of figure for, say, a non-residential property.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry, but it's not good enough. And you just feel terrible. You feel like a bad cop. But at the end of the day, the ATO have been very clear for some time that that's what they expect. Yeah, and then there's just no sort of flexibility with that. And there are instances where they, as an alternative to going back to the real estate agent who did the valuation and getting to the additional work, the trustee will obtain additional information from other sources. They'll get their own comparable sales. They'll be able to build up, an arguable position, for want of a better word, that you can then go, all right, look, we'll let this, you've provided me with sufficient audit evidence to move forward. But then what ends up happening is in the management letter that we send to the trustee, we say, look, effectively, you've scraped through this year, but please, next year, these are the requirements. This is what you need to know. So it's sort of almost like it becomes an educational process. But yeah, it's not a nice feeling, I have to say, Aaron, having to do that. Yeah. And
therefore, and I think you made the comment there, it's a far more difficult process to obtain information when we go beyond residential property. So you've got the core datas and this sort of core logic there where you're able to apply or seek that feeding of information to be able to get it. So it's, I guess that you're confronting greater challenges maybe in a commercial sense and even other assets, when you're trying to value, unit trusts and other things, that they're the more problematic issues for you.
Most definitely. I mean, the reality is that for residential properties, you have alternative options. You have those online valuations and whatnot, and sort of, and I guess sort of comparable data that a trustee could obtain themselves. Once you get into commercial property, I mean, particularly business property that's quite unique, so mechanical warehouses and as opposed to just sort of standard commercial offices, getting comparable data is almost impossible. And the only real solution is a proper valuation from a properly qualified valuer. And there's really no room to move there. And look, I have to say most accountants and trustees have been quite good on that front. They recognise the unique characteristics of commercial property. Typically, they're quite expensive and quite often a very sizable portion of the fund. So they sort of accept that, having to obtain a proper valuation is just a cost of holding this particular asset class. And that's been good, but it is a bit problematic. Particularly when these accountants want to wrap up the job and all of a sudden they're faced with this extra hurdle.
Yeah, they've got billing, they want to get billed and they can't get a bill until
That's right.
Well done.
Yeah, look, I mean, one thing you just put out, Aaron, the non-property type investments, that really has been a big problem for us this year. I mean, what we are seeing, I guess, is an increased involvement, increased investment in, as you say, unit trusts, unusual investments, non-listed investments, and private equity, startups, all that kind of thing, even overseas entities that aren't listed, and getting an adequate valuation of those is just incredibly difficult. That is, look, they're nowhere near as common as property, commercial property, whatnot, but in terms of the amount of effort that an auditor has to spend, it's definitely a real pain, And I guess, again, it's a sort of educational path that we've kind of taken where the trustee will endeavour to come up with something and will help in that process. But often, I mean, in many cases, we just have to say, look, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to qualify. You just don't have enough information.
Evidence to be able to support.
Yeah. But then you sort of say, well, look, this is what you need. And so hopefully next year you are getting better valuations out of the trustees.
Yeah. And a letter from the commissioner will help sort that out to make sure they do next year as well.
Yeah, look, well, I don't know if that's going to happen. I can't but help but feel that the poor ATO is going to be inundated with these Part A qualifications and Part B qualifications, and But yes, it will help if they get sent out as well.
And I jokingly say that, but that's kind of. The ATO don't send these messages out unless there's an undertone of that sort of stuff happening either. So yes, in that sense. And I mean, I even look at myself talking about the topic of valuations. I mean, talking to people a lot about pensions and the commencing values of pensions and, what the valuation requirement is around those things. And do you need to have your 30 June audited balances done for the commencement of the pension on 1 July? So valuations is such a big topic that it like you said, I guess, from the very forefront, that it's not necessarily just about, is it a valuation on a residential property? It's a valuation for when you're starting an income stream. It's a valuation on a startup or investment property you got overseas, and no one can get to that country, and you don't know where the ownership is. So there's a whole. It's an absolute minefield.
Definitely,
when you think about valuations in SMSFs.
And I mean, I think it'll get to the point where it'll sort itself out financially, where auditors and accountants, when faced with these sort of unusual investments, will basically say, look, mate, we're going to have to charge you a premium to do the work for this particular, this asset class. So
Speaking of more unusual investments, we're also seeing, I guess, a small number of SMSFs invest in newer sorts of assets like Bitcoin or NFTs. Are you having any headaches in that area as well?
As you close your eyes and go,
we sort of cry softly on the inside. Look, I mean, crypto's always been very problematic from an audit point of view, and it continues to be. Look, and the sort of resources available to SMSF trustees to help get them over the line has definitely improved. Those sort of good quality wallets and whatnot. But to our mind, it's still very difficult, to get there. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not getting reports that have been verified by another auditor. At the end of the day, they're just sort of extracts from another organisation, and typically we'll put in some sort of limitation with those resources. Fortunately, the amount of super funds that we're seeing invest in crypto surprisingly hasn't been massive. There is a steady small growth in that. What we've probably seen a lot more of is people going back to the future and actually investing in things like precious metals and gold and bullion and storing them under the bed. It's sort of the end of the world type.
Like the artwork on the wall.
Yeah, that's true. Well, hopefully not too many of those, but so crypto, precious, all these unusual investments, I guess, with one eye to where the ATO, like their philosophical approach to what they expect, it has created problems for us auditors, definitely. And I guess at the end of the day, we sort of say, well, look, has it met the requirements of the ATO? Whether it's crypto, whether it's gold bullion, has it met it? If it hasn't, if the trustees can't prove it beyond, to get to that sufficient audit evidence, we just end up saying, look, we're going to have to qualify. You deal with the ATO on this.
Yep. So the one thing I'm interested on, because COVID has obviously thrown up challenges. We've spoken about valuations. We've got rent relief and so forth. I want to touch a bit more on the practical stuff here, and we touched on with the valuation bit before about having to go to the trustee to get information, and how challenging is that as a practitioner at the moment, trying to get information. We're going through periods of lockdown. We're going, everyone's being recommended to work from home at the moment again.
Yes.
So has there actually been a impact on the way in which auditors are dealing with, the accountant, the trustee, getting stuff within the prescribed timeframes that you're asking for this stuff as well?
Oh, look, you're absolutely right, Aaron. It's definitely been a big problem. And unfortunately, I hate to say, it does feel like it's getting worse. This latest wave that we just seem to be at the start of, that's going to have a big impact as well. Look, I mean, in the old days, pre-COVID, I mean, you would have these requirements. You need this report, you need that, you need to go back to your broker for this, that sort of thing. Now everything's been, it's just slowing down. And look, often it will be outside those prescribed periods. We were asked for this information. More problematic is there are situations where the trustee simply can't get that information. like we might need some additional information for a valuation, and they just say, look, I refuse to go back to. I don't want to have to deal with strangers. I'm 75 years old. I've got a heart condition. I don't want to. I don't want to endanger my health.
Immune compromised. Yep.
Yeah. So sort of, you've got this sort of theoretical model of how an audit should go, coming up to these health issues that are being experienced by trustees or by the organisations that they use. Where the organisations themselves are getting swamped with requests for whatever, and they can't provide the info. So, the accountants that are sort of compiling information, they themselves are struggling on a range of different fronts. So the whole process is getting incredibly, it's sort of getting swamped, and we're just not getting the sort of streamlined audits that we used to be able to do. I mean, it's not always the case. In fact, it's quite uncommon, but there is a significant portion of audits that just run into these problems.
And how are you kind of dealing with those issues in a practical kind of level?
Look, I think you just have to be reasonable. I mean, there are the odd occasion where, for whatever reason, the trustee simply can't obtain the information, and it's vital information. And you just got to play that with a straight bat and say, look, well, I'm sorry, we're going to have to qualify. We're going to have to, and I mean, it may not necessarily result in a Part B breach, but if they can't find information to support the figures and the financial statements, it may be a Part A. But you play it with a straight bat, and hopefully all the ATO will be sort of accommodating. Alternative, I mean, that's fairly uncommon, but I guess more commonly you just have to sort of work your way around it, try and come up with solutions. We are spending a lot more time having to solve those particular problems, though. I guess we're still a couple of months away from the deadline. I think as we get closer to the deadline, I think that these issues will really, the dangers and the problems will really come to the fore. And, that could be interesting.
I can absolutely guarantee you it'll be very interesting when you think about you overlay all the independence changes and the audit relationships that have actually gone on.
Yes.
You will definitely see this late push, and I'm an accountant by trade. Accountants do have this problem to sometimes leave stuff to very late when it comes to this, which raises a very interesting topic when we talk about some things for this year, because one of those is obviously going to be the gnarly changes too, right?
Yes.
So from the 1st of July 2022, which again, I use that reference as something that might happen very late in getting those arrangements fixed. But I guess more to the point, what do you see as some of the things in the audit industry, in the audit profession for your peers that they need to be sort of looking at and addressing for this year ahead?
Well, that's a tricky one. I mean, I guess the main thing that sort of springs to mind is that for the next couple of months, it's simply a case of just knuckle down. I mean, it's interesting what you said there about, the last minutes. I mean, as Australia, Aaron, I mean, if it wasn't for last minutes, nothing would get done.
Yeah.
Look, I have to say what we've experienced at Aquila Super is that because of the COVID impacts last year, the amount of work coming through the pipe this year has been lessened, especially in the first sort of part of the year. And we sort of went back to a lot of clients and said, look, what's going on? And I said, look, all this work's coming, but we're not quite ready yet. So I believe it's just a tsunami of work that is supposed to be done before the deadline, much, much more than in previous years. And I don't know whether that's going to be the case. So I guess the sort of, it's not very, it's not unusual, but getting the work done before the deadline is going to be the primary focus for this year. And I guess it is going to cause issues with all these additional requirements, particularly the valuation side of things. There's no simple answer to that. The ATO have their expectations. You have to meet them. You just got to sort of grin and bear it. I guess what I would be hoping is that the regulators sort of watching this and looking at the numbers and going, oh, look, and I guess looking not just at the lodgement numbers, but the COVID numbers, and saying, well, maybe we need to be a little bit flexible, with all the changes that have been raised, and say, look, maybe we need to cut the accountants a bit more slack like they did in the previous year. So,
I agree. I mean, you would hope from a regulatory point of view, they're spending a lot of time looking at the data, looking at lodgements and really trying to forward plan with the industry to go, well, are we going to have this tsunami, and then are you going to be seeing challenges of accountants and auditors butting heads needing to get it done, and the auditors going, no, we need this.
Absolutely.
And you end up in a situation whereby we're making funds, having their registration details withheld, and we go back to sort of square one again. So
look, you've just raised a good point. They're having those registration details sort of removed. Within I don't know, with a matter of days now, it appears. If something isn't done, it's creating tremendous angst with, for these trustees. And again, I was talking to another sort of practitioner mate, and we sort of decided that, the logo for the SMSF audit profession should be a ham sandwich, because, that seems what happens, and what's going to occur close to the deadline is accountants, as you say, will be putting tremendous pressure on the auditors, saying, look, we need this done. We're already late, not because the SMSF auditor's fault, we need it done. And the poor SMSF auditor is going to have to sort of turn around and say, look, I'm sorry, this is what the ATO requires, not just on things like valuations, but audit evidence, documentation, internal audit reports, those sorts of things. We can't be
cutting corners. Yeah.
We can't be, it's not just cutting corners, but, as you pointed out, what we used to do, say, 10, 15 years ago, that's gone. You need to have very strong audit files these days. So, the next couple of months is going to be quite interesting.
Is there anything else that you think SMSF professionals need to be paying attention to in terms of potential audit issues or anything like that?
No, look, there was that sort of the previous discussion that we had on SMSF Advisor. I did raise the litigation risk. And I think that because most SMSF professionals, auditors and accountants have been very much in the trenches, so to speak, that has kind of, it hasn't gone away, but the risk has faded away, or at least the perception, but it's still very, very much there. And the sort of feeling I have within talking to other industry participants is there are still very much, there are these cases that are slowly coming to the end game that involve SMSF audits and accounts, basically trustees suing their professional advisor. And I think that is very much something that SMSF professionals need to be aware of, notwithstanding these tremendous pressures that we're under.
Yeah, and I think that you're 100% right there insofar that we continue to read about all the the cases of dispute around payment of death benefits and so forth, but that translation back into responsibility of the professional in an advice way, or we look at Camembert or any of those McGoldricks and so forth. So these areas of litigation are going to become more and more as the pot gets bigger and bigger as well, and going through these turbulent times provide an even greater challenge to make sure that all your I's are dotted, all your T's are crossed and that sort of stuff, because it will expose areas of businesses and assets going under, which then there'll be recourse being sought and stuff as well. So to your point around that litigation piece, absolutely, in all the training I do and impress upon people about the need for the documentation, this is the reason why. And I know you do a lot of that stuff yourself to go, well, on the flip side here, if you want to be exposed to this, then you've got a guy right here, Chris, who will give all those expert opinions to
Yeah, well, Aaron, we've often acted for the sort of defence side, for want of a better word, the insurance side, and you look at these work papers that these accountants prepared, and you just shake your head, and you're just opening yourselves up for a big sort of lawsuit. And I believe most of the people in the profession, they just almost sort of going through their professional life, just not thinking about it, not being aware, and it'd be so easy. And I think the big danger for those that work in the SMSF space is that if an investment goes bad because a trustee just made bad decisions or whatever, they're going to be looking around for someone to sue. And those cases you pointed out, the impression I get is that it's actually made it easier for them to do so. So,
it's opened up the opportunity for lawyers to go, well, there's multiple professionals here that we could actually target.
Absolutely.
As to who was liable or partly liable, but they're the one that's got the most PI that we can actually have a crack at.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. That was very much appreciated, not only in the context of valuations as a key issue, but some of the things that we certainly need to be aware of. As you said, we are going through a wave at the moment, an Omicron wave, and we will have a lodgement wave quite clearly in getting audits done as well. So let's hopefully that none of that is contagious.
Thanks, Aaron.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. See you.
So that was an interesting segment with Chris there, who sort of covered what impact COVID's kind of having on getting critical valuations and just the overall impact on that industry at the moment, and just some of the issues that have been cropping up in general. What were the main takeaways that you got from that, Aaron?
Yeah, I think there's a real there's a balance between technical and practical for me here. So, we always talk about here's what we need to do with the letter of the law around technical issues. So, the evidence that's required, meeting the timeframes, whether an auditor has to qualify and so forth. But what Chris was able to talk us through there is yes, we need to do that, and we're going to come up with objections and challenges, but there is a whole range of practical things we've got to get through. And he made mention of people not wanting to go out and engage. They've become a bit more hermit-like, which I can understand, having spent 200 and however many bloody days it was as a world record in Melbourne in lockdown. You see these changes in characters of people, and therefore the ability to get this stuff where they might normally have gone into the agent and getting that, they now might get it as a phone call, might send it as an email. And so it's going to take a much longer process to get this stuff, and therefore it puts at risk being able to meet timeframes for audit evidence to be back to auditors and qualifications and stuff. And, he also spoke about not having the workers in the office because, there may be a number of COVID cases. And so I found it fascinating to sort of get some of that real insight into how auditors are facing those challenges, and the fact that there appears to be this build-up of work. And just like Omicron, it's going to hit this peak as we get closer to lodgement date. So, they're talking about the peak in late January, February, or whatever it is. It's going to get right around May 15 will be the audit peak. And I think, as I finished up before, let's just hope none of us get contagious with it either. So, because I did audit when I was very, very young, and I don't want to do it anymore. So I don't want to catch the audit bug.
Yeah. And I can imagine those kind of issues are probably only going to get worse, unfortunately, because a lot of people are still on holidays at the moment, and we don't know sort of where this outbreak's going to go and how many more staff are going to be off sick, and that work's just going to build up. So it'll be interesting to see what the next few months is going to be. And that
whole, it's that independence change, right, as well. So we've seen such a large number of funds having to change auditors because of the Chinese walls and all those sort of things that were in play up until 1 July last year. And, you're hoping that most people have done the changes that they needed to do. And so if you've got a new auditor, well, you've got a whole new process that you've potentially got to walk through with that auditor, because they're going to they're going to want more evidence picking up an audit for the first time than they ever have, as you would sort of each and every year thereafter. So, yeah, there's a pretty big workload coming, I would say. Yes.
Yeah. And I imagine, some new auditors are going to have different opinions and need different things. So, that'll definitely might be some extra work in those cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Miranda, as always, we always invite people to give us some topics, suggested speakers and so forth. So how can they get in contact with us to do so? Yeah,
so if they have any suggestions like that, they can get in contact with us at editor@smsfadvisoronline.com, and we'd love to hear from you. That's all for now. Thanks for listening in again.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll see you next week on the SMSF Advisor Show. Bye for now.
Interest rates are rising fast, and that means higher mortgage repayments. But some lenders have increased their rates more than others, so that could mean your clients are now paying too much for their loan. We can quickly compare your client's rate with hundreds of similar loans, so you are confident that you've got the best rate on the market, or we'll find you a better rate. Make sure your clients aren't paying the highest interest rates. Call Finny today. Visit finny.com.au and let us take the research and admin out of finding a new rate for your clients.